you. Distinguished editor at Domes, former dean of the School of Information at the University of Wisconsin, and we value very much our connections with the University of Wisconsin through many years now, and of course with Dr. Aman. Dr. Aman?
Thank you very much, Paul, and thanks to all of you for joining us on this glorious day in Washington, D.C. It could have been worse, as you know, so enjoy the weather and enjoy the conference. I just would like to say that regretfully, some of our colleagues who actually submitted their papers and were planning to come, but due to some of the unrest in some parts of the Arab world, were not able to get their visa to the United States. So we will be thinking of them, and we are hoping that definitely we will include their papers in the forthcoming book that is based on your papers and others submitted to this conference. I also would like to thank our sponsors from the American Public University, University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and certainly the Policy Studies Organization under the leadership of Paul and many others. Actually, his young staff has been great, and some of mine, one is here, Brittany Khatib. She will be going around, those of you who wish to talk about publishing articles in Domes or about your papers that you have been submitted, and in fact they are being edited as we speak now in the hope of getting the book out shortly after the conclusion of this conference to be published by BSO sponsored Westphalia Press. So we will be in touch, and don't be mad at us when we keep sending manuscripts back and forth, but that is definitely, we want you to look good, and we want us to look good also in terms of our publications, whether it is the Digest of Middle East Studies or any other future books that will be coming from Westphalia Press. Again, thank you for joining us. I look forward to meeting you individually. I'll have some table in the back for those of you who wish to talk about submitting articles to the journal or any other scholarly issues. We can talk about them in private or in public, whatever the case may be. And enjoy the conference. And thanks again. I look forward to your presentations. Thanks, Paul.
I'll just mention that we get a lot of books, and we're always looking for book reviewers. Last year we picked up several book reviewers from the conference. We see the conference as a dialogue, a continuing one, and we invite people we think not only will be interested in the topic, but might wish to publish or review a book or in some other way engage in a dialogue all during the year. If you are readers of the Huntington Post or readers of the Middle East newspapers, Jerusalem Post, our speaker this morning is very familiar to you, as well as many books on the subject, and has provided distinguished leadership at New York University for many years in many ways. He is insightful, generous. I wish I had his frequent flyer points for going to the Middle East. He's en route all the time. I think that we're in for a very good treat this morning. He has said he will take questions. The questions at this conference are not Chatham House rules. I'm a member of the Chatham House, and these are not Chatham House rules. They can be quoted unless the speaker or someone specifically says, a couple of our friends here today said because of the countries they're from, they do not wish to be quoted by name, but make that clear in the session when you're speaking, because the conference in general is not under Chatham House rules. Alon, I'm very, very proud to introduce you to the audience today. Thank you very much.
I'm not sure I deserve all this praise coming from Paul, but I just want to share with you, I just came this morning from New York. So I may once in a while mumble a bit here and there because I'm still half asleep, but nevertheless we're going to do our best. I was, as I was driving here, I was thinking there was a case where the speaker was late, and the people were waiting for him to come. He never showed up. So finally, the organizers turned to someone he knows, well the subject, said, "Please, we need you to take over because our speaker did not show up. I want you to get the people enthusiastic, get them to be excited about the subject matter, get them to participate, provoke them with good questions, and tell them a little bit about the world, what's going on." And he said, "My goodness, it's very tall order. So how much time do I have to do all of this?" He said, "Take all the time you want, but try to limit it to 5 minutes." As I met this morning, Paul, and we're talking about the time limitations, and I said, "Paul, how much time do I have?" He said, "Alon, for you, as much as you like, but try to make it on the short side." Anyway, I recently, I shouldn't say recently, but the last 2 years, I've been dwelling more so on other aspects of the various conflicts in terms of what is conflict resolution, or what are the elements involved in conflict resolutions. Obviously, those of you who have been involved in this kind of subject, but my focus has begun, and I took a much specific interest in the psychological dimension of conflict. That is, if we look, for example, and we're going to be talking a bit more on this subject, that is, if we look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, most people who've been observing and surveying this conflict will tell you, why should this be so complicated? That is, in the final analysis, there are not too many choices. A two-state solution is the only real choice. Coexistence is inevitable under any circumstances. Whether the Israelis like it or not, whether the Palestinians like it or not, they must and will have to coexist. And they have, however, to make a choice. What sort of coexistence they're going to have? Do they want to kill each other to the end of time, or do they want to cooperate, live in peace and amity? These are the real choices. So if you look at the parameters, some settlement to be incorporated into Israel proper, the Palestinian refugee will have to be resettled. So we know the parameters, but we still have to ask ourselves the very fundamental question, then why this conflict has been going on for the last 65 years? What's behind it? And I submit to you today that there are other critical elements that have not, I'm not suggesting to you this is brand new material that I'm imparting with you, but there's no question this element has not been fully investigated to understand why these two people, two nations, have not been able to come to this point to understanding that they must coexist, and then they must find a formula that can support that and sustain that coexistence. And when you look, you have to ask yourself this simple question: what it is that they are thinking, that is, where they're coming from, what is their mindset, how this mindset been formed. And so what I decided to do is basically write 5 questions, and I'll try to answer the 5 questions, and then which are contiguous and will make, I hope, some sense. So the first question for me is, why is it that we must change our thinking and approach to the conflict resolution? So as I said earlier, we can look at the obvious, at the conflicting issue, and say, well, this can be resolved this way or that way. But to what extent are we actually paying attention to the psychological element behind each conflicting issue? So there are many conflicting issues between Israel and the Palestinians. How their psyche is impacting on every of these issues. And that is where we're going to have to think in different terms. So the number one is we have to look at history. That is where they come from. And needless to tell you, if you look at Jewish history without elaborating much, the experience, the expulsion, the death camps. So when eventually Israel was created, there's a specific mindset that the Jews have brought with them from the outside world. That sense of victimhood was part and parcel of the Jewish character in Israel in particular. And they could not let go of that sense of vulnerability and victimhood. And hence you can understand why, for example, the Israelis are so keen when it comes to national security issues. So, but history is part and parcel of their culture, part and parcel of their policy making, part and parcel in their dealing with the enemy as well. And then look at the Palestinian side. And what you see there is a group, these people, a nation, living on certain land called Palestine, albeit they were not a state, and they lived under Ottoman occupation control, subsequently under British. But nevertheless, there are people, a nation that have been there for thousands of years, perhaps, maybe more. And from their perspective, these people came in by and large from the outside and usurped and expropriated their land. They took it away from them. That is historical experience, what the Palestinians call the Nakba. This is part and parcel of has become a Palestinian soul. They could not impart from that feeling because that was a tragedy. From their perspective, not akin to what the Jews experienced in Europe, but just the same. So here, if we do not consider carefully where is this mindset come from a historical perspective, as far as the Palestinians are concerned, we are not going to be able to understand really why is it the refugee problem has become central issue in the conflict. Why is it the Palestinians may agree eventually to partial return, maybe few 10 or 15 or 20,000, but they still want to maintain the essence of the right of return. It is that understanding from historical perspective that we have to look into very carefully. Now that water. In order to understand how to mitigate that historical account between the two sides, let's take the other factor, the religion. Yes, the Israeli conflict is seen by most as a territorial, is political. But without any question, there's tremendous, very strong religious component to the conflict. Israelis claim the entire land of Israel. As Prime Minister Netanyahu in Congress said, this is our land, it's been bequeathed to us, all of it, from the Mediterranean to the river, to the Jordan River. And so we will be generous with the Palestinians. We'll give them a crumbs here and there. That is the perception the Israelis have from a religious perspective. Many of them do. Of course, Jerusalem represents something even more unique. Jerusalem has been mentioned in the Old Testament nearly 700 times. Jews throughout the world, throughout the diaspora, every Passover, they say, this year we are here, next year in Jerusalem. This too is embedded in their soul, in their psyche, in their mind. So obviously they look at the West Bank and they look at Jerusalem from an entirely different perspective, from a religious perspective. That is, and they don't feel necessarily they need to prove it because religion, belief, does not require really any evidence. But from their perspective, the evidence is there. The willing was there. All these remnants from Jewish history is there. But then look at the Palestinians. That same conviction is also a religious conviction. There's no question, they say there's an account when Muhammad, when died on his way to heaven, he stopped in Jerusalem, where the Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock subsequently were built. They've been living there for more than 1,000 years with these shrines in front of them. For them, Jerusalem is part and parcel of their very culture, very religion, very existence. And under what circumstances will they ever be willing or able to surrender part of it? If not, that is, again, must be now considered from a psychological perspective. You can't just simply say, you guys sit together, we divide the city, and you're going to be all fine. We have to provide other elements to bring them to that point, and which I'll hope to be able to address in the limited time that we have. Of course, the other thing is what sustains us as a culture. That is, if you look at both sides, and if you look at the media, look at the schools, look at the books that's been written, and you look at it carefully, what you see there is there's an effort, sometimes tacit, sometimes more open, to have some kind of creating a division, artificial division. There is no doubt in our mind, any of you can go to Palestinian schools and will find that Israel is maligned on a regular basis. The teachers telling them that they don't refer to Israel as a country. The books do not even show Israel in the map. And you go to Israeli books, you probably still have a little less, but nevertheless, there is no real recognition. There's a culture of denial, self-denial. And that self-denial has been perpetuating itself, from day one until today. And that is, again, how do you mitigate that? That is going to be the question we need to deal with. And then, of course, you have public narrative. Public narrative is powerful when it comes to conflict resolution. Just imagine for a moment. The Palestinians have been hearing the right of return for the last 65 years. You have that right to go. This is your land. And that is what they know. The children grow up in school knowing one thing. This is our land, and we're going to have to, one form or another, repossess it. This is the mentality. This is the mindset. Public narrative being further enforced with the media, education, in every possible means, this is being told. Not just about the refugees, about their rights, about Israel as an occupying power. All of this is being embedded again into the mind and the psyche of every Palestinian. When you look at the Jews, you're going to hear again the same kind of public narrative, albeit supporting the Jewish posture, the Jewish position, the Israeli position. This is our land, and this is what this belongs to us, and it's been reinforced day in and day out in the media and in the school and elsewhere. This public narrative continue to reinforce the historical perspective, the religious perspective, the education as well, and in so doing, creating a sort of a package dominating the mindset of both sides to a level that it's become almost impossible to modify just at the negotiating table. Just to give you an example, in 2000, when Yasser Arafat was negotiating with Ehud Barak, the then prime minister, from what we know, and we've seen some of these documents, they agreed nearly 80-90% of all the issues, including, and I repeat, including the right of return. That is, Arafat at the time accepted that there would be about 30 or 35,000 Palestinians will go back under family reunification, 5,000 or so each year, and the rest to be compensated to be resettled in the West Bank and Gaza in a Palestinian state. And then came the time, with President Clinton present, the time to sign on the dotted line about the issue of the Palestinians, and Arafat said, no way. What do you mean? But you just agreed that this is what's going to be. He said, yes, I agree to this today, but I'm not prepared to commit the next generation and usurp away from them the right of return. So I agree to the numbers, but I want the right of return to be part and parcel of this document. Which means, let's say he did not raise this question, let us say he go out from this conference, he signed the agreement, and he now goes to the Palestinian public and said to them, we have now peace agreement, but there's going to be no right of return. You guys we're going to have to find different solutions for you. He would have been killed probably just the same as they killed Yitzhak Rabin, or just the way Anwar Sadat was killed. So that means to the extent that the public is not prepared to accept the would-be solution, if not the only solution, how do you need to prepare the public for such a kind of solution? And therefore you have to have a different approach, what it is that you need to do. The third question, why is the resistance to change and self-denial, rejection and avoiding the inevitable? What happened, when you look at it from a psychological perspective? People, by and large, resist change. Resist change specifically if that change is not in conformity, certainly not in conformity with their wishes, with their aspirations, with the things that they really want to achieve. And in particular, when you look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the two people Israel as well as the Palestinians, are their infancy when it comes to the establishment of their nationhood. So they are extremely jealous, extremely careful as to how this nationhood is evolving and developing. That is a change, that does not conform with that perception of what nationhood would mean to either party, is going to be rejected. And you adopt self-denial as if the other party simply doesn't exist. There's a reason, for example, why Israelis, or specifically right of center, insist on the Jewish national character of the state. Why do they say Israel has to be recognized as a Jewish state? Because it is not Jewish state. It is not going to provide the umbrella, the cover, the protection necessary in order to maintain the Jewishness or to protect the Jews with that kind of an entity that can provide the kind of security, at least from the perspective of these individuals. That is, the Jewishness of the state become not just a desire to rule others, but a means by which to sustain the existence of Jewish people as such under that kind of an umbrella, having been persecuted and pushed around all over for millennia. That's the Jewish nature of the state, is creating the kind of refuge they need, a refuge that has to be guarded by all means and in every which way. For the Palestinians, they've been given the opportunity to establish a state according to the partition plan in 47. They refused it. But that does not mean that they lost or should lose the right to establish a state at this juncture. That is, at that one point on time, they wanted all of Palestine. Over time, conditions on the ground have changed, and they begin to think in terms of reality on the ground. Can we, in fact, get rid of the Israelis? Are there any means by which we can get rid of them? And probably Mahmoud Abbas and others before him, even perhaps Arafat himself, concluded that Israel is a fact of life. We're going to have to live with it. The same thing that was also passed on to specifically to the Palestinians in the West Bank, coming to the conclusion that Israel is a fact, is a reality, is inevitable, is going to exist. Same thing, the Israelis began to think in those terms. That is, from the Palestinian perspective, now that there is Israel, that further strengthened, not weakened, but strengthened their claim for a state of their own. So from there, when they see Israeli expansion, when they see Israelis presumably talking, for example, about the two-state solution, and at the same time they continue to expand the settlement in the West Bank, they see this as not just double talk, but as a complete lie. That is, Israelis simply do not really believe in the two-state solution, because if they did, at a minimum, they'll stop the expansion of the settlement. And that's not happening. So here, the change, the fear of change that is for the Palestinians now to change the narrative in this connection, it could be extremely hazardous. It will not be acceptable. For the Israelis is to change their position on the nature of the state they want to maintain. That is also hazardous to them. So the fear of change is creating now a new block, a new stumbling block on the way to allowing those two people to reconcile. The fifth question: what are the tools of choice that to enforce the perception of both sides in order to perpetuate these concepts? They needed to think in terms of tools to perpetuate the position that they have. So two things have taken place. One is a consistent effort to delegitimize the other. Delegitimization of the other becomes something that has been pursued day in and day out. Certainly neither side will admit it, but delegitimization takes a number of forms. Let's start with the Israelis. When you have roadblocks, when you imprison people, when you raid homes in the middle of the night and you terrify women and children, when you incarcerate Palestinians, when you prevent them from doing so many normal things that ordinary people would do, This is a form of subjugation. This is a form of delegitimizing them as people. We look at the Palestinians, specifically say Hamas, under no circumstances they would say we would recognize Israel's right to exist. That is, in their books, in their preaching, in their narrative, they in fact enforce the concept of delegitimization. It delegitimizes Israel as a state as it exists today. So here what you have this process is continuing, and as a result, of course, the parties not coming closer to one another. The gap grows between the other side. And the other element to maintain the philosophy they've been upholding to, that is unilateralism. That is delegitimation on one side and then taking unilateral actions on the other side. Israel, for example, decides on its own where to build the settlement, how far to go, what land to appropriate, and so on and so forth. These unilateral actions, and now, of course, many parties, the two parties that empower, the Naftali Bennett party and certainly the Likud, they have, and previously the Israel Beitenu, these three, they absolutely believe that in Israel at this juncture ought to take significant unilateral action, appropriate area C, for example, and not to concern themselves with it. And what is the pretext? The Palestinians simply do not want to negotiate. We don't trust them even if they negotiate. And even if we reach an agreement, we are not sure they will uphold such an agreement. And so then it's very easy to come to the conclusion, we need to take unilateral action, and we will determine our own fate and how we go. If you look at the Palestinian side, you see, not exactly the same, but similar approach. For example, going to the United Nations and asking to become a member observer state. That's a unilateral action in order to enforce what they believe should be there. Unilateral action in terms of rejection, resistance. They will resist and will continue to resist, even when knowing that the retribution or the punishment or the Israeli reaction could be as such that is going to further undermine their interest. But so what we're saying here, when you look at both sides and you look at them, unilateralism is what they're approaching, plus the delegitimization, you are further tearing the people apart, and the prospect for a solution becomes dimmer rather than better over time. So the question now I ask myself, what are the means? What are the measures? And we're trying to sort of rush through this because I would like to allow some time for questions and answers. And that is, I identified the 7 kind of measures, not pipe dreams, but measures that need to be taken today in order to be able to begin a process of how to mitigate this conflict, what it's going to take. So the number one, in my view, is accepting the inevitable, which I alluded to before. That is, Israeli officials, Palestinian officials, ought to openly say, clearly say, they are saying it, but they don't mean it. Now they're going to have to mean it when they say, we believe in a two-state solution. That is, accepting the inevitability of coexistence. And that has to be made public. Because if you believe it, if that's what you preach, then inadvertently you're going to have to think in terms of how much can I expand this settlement or that settlement? Can I actually build in area E1? That is, once you accept the inevitability of coexistence, it's in and of itself is going to inhibit you from taking unilateral action that is going to be counterproductive to what you just have stated. Very important to keep in mind. The second point is that establishing credibility. And I'm not talking about sitting down and negotiating it, but establishing credibility. There is simply no credibility between the two sides. What are you going to do? To establish credibility, Israel, for example, ought to say, we are recognizing the inevitable, and therefore we are not going to build another settlement. We may expand certain settlements because we feel this is going to eventually be incorporated into Israel proper against, some kind of land swap. But we are going to not build any. And in so doing, in following this through, they will begin to establish a level of credibility in the eyes of the Palestinians. That's going to be absolutely necessary. And among certainly other, any kind of intermediate agreements between the two sides, as they currently exist between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, in terms of security, in terms of trade, however limited, both sides need to absolutely make certain that to whatever they agree upon, they would have to fulfill to the maximum extent in order to develop, to further foster credibility between the two sides. The nurturing trust. That's how, trust. What trust, how critical trust is in negotiation. You certainly cannot sit down and negotiate a trust. From now on, I trust you, you trust me. But you have to make sure that you need trust in order for you to build on relationship. And since you cannot negotiate a trust by an agreement, you have to create mechanisms that will allow you to develop trust. That is, if there is going to be, let me give you an example. Israel, you always uses the excuse that, look, we withdrew from Gaza, and look what happened. How can we trust them? If we withdraw from the West Bank, we're going to end up, rockets will be raining on us all the time, just the same. And my answer to this question is, well, just look at how you withdrew from Gaza. If you withdrew, the withdrawal from Gaza was unilateral, without agreement with the Palestinians, without consultation. But think in terms of, if you, instead of withdrawing from Gaza within a week or two, you sat down with the Palestinian Authority and agree on a withdrawal, a phased withdrawal that would require reciprocity on the other part of the other side. And in so doing, with every phase you make, every move you make, the other side needs to reciprocate. And in so doing, you begin to build a trust. And even if this withdrawal from Gaza would have taken a year or two, it would have been worthwhile. Just imagine, and I don't think I'm having false, I'm not imagining things. I believe that if Israel, if Sharon at the time, worked out a solution along these lines, phased withdrawal with the reciprocity, perhaps Hamas would not have been able to take over Gaza. Keep that in mind. The next, again, I go back to changing public narrative. There must be concerted effort on both sides to begin to speak different language to the public. Change your public narrative. You don't need to go to TV and Twitter and Facebook and say, we love you Israelis, and the Israelis will respond, we love you all Palestinians. We are brothers, and we're going to be this way or that way. What I am saying here, by changing the public narrative, is begin to impart to the public that we have to coexist. We're going to have to begin to change our approach to one another. That is, the public need to know that something is taking place in order to bring them closer to one another. The one missing element here, which is so critical in my view in conflict resolution, is the absolute lack of contact between the two sides. We have been a conduit for bringing some Israelis some Palestinians to Israel. They were absolutely stunned to see what's going on in Tel Aviv on the beaches. They never imagined this is possible. And in talking to the Israelis, they felt like brothers, as if they are not enemies at all. And we did exactly the same thing. We took Israelis to the West Bank and Ramallah and Jenin. And we went to sit down in restaurants and we ate together. No one felt this is an Israeli. They look alike. Many of them speak Hebrew and speak Arabic. But when this contact, the human contact, is missing, there is absolutely no way you can bridge the gap between two people that have completely strange, as if one comes from one planet and the other one comes from the other planet. What you're creating is the notion, the perception, this is the enemy, this is my enemy. And as long as you perceive the other side as your enemy, We are not going to be able to create that human contact necessary. And the only way to do so is by bringing people together. You know, you sitting here, I don't know how many Jews or Israelis are here, how many Arabs or Muslims coming from different countries. But didn't you have the experience that when you sit outside Israel, outside Palestine, you're actually friends and wonderful and have a great, wonderful relationship? Why should not be the case between Israelis and the Palestinians? And that we have to keep in mind. Then, finally, I want to mention to you the encouraging public forums. You know, this is a wonderful public forum, and I always say that just by way of example, let's take Jerusalem. And the two parties just simply do not see eye to eye. But just imagine we have Israeli scholars, you know, religious scholars, and a Palestinian religious scholar who believe that Jerusalem should be a capital of two states, who believe in coexistence. And let them sit down around a round table with all the media is available, and let them discuss possibilities how to resolve the future of Jerusalem. Knowing one thing, that this is the road we have to take. Imagine that it's such an open-ended forum that deal with the Palestinian refugees. Both sides are sitting, and they don't have to be in Israel initially or in Ramallah. These kinds of forums can take place exactly in this house, where the world will begin to see a new opinion, different ideas, how to reconcile. We need to start a process of reconciliation, and that process of reconciliation does not begin at the negotiating table. These people should not be officials representing their government. The scholars who believe, all their requirement is to believe that these two people must find a formula to coexist. You know, I can go on, but I know my time is up, and I'll be happy to entertain a few questions.
Well, actually, in an idealist perspective, I mean, I agree totally with you. All right, I think the real issue is how to actualize all of those solutions or those prerequisites for a solution. What worries me, as you move to actualize these things, to what extent do you risk civil war on both sides? But particularly in the Israeli side. I mean, when Rabin made really very minimal gestures towards reconciliation, we know what happened. And probably if Arafat had done so, actually I know that Arafat at least proclaimed to me personally actually once, that he trusted Rabin, that he saw Rabin as his partner. To actually publicly say that might have endangered his life at some point in time. But what is your concerns about this possibility of actual, or sort of a low-level, maybe high-level civil war on the Israeli side if you actually move in these directions?
Well, I really have zero concern, to be very honest with you, because if you look at the Israeli society today, how open it is, you can go to open any newspaper and you see the most intense criticism of the government, day in and day out. Israelis are exposed to that, are very much exposed to entirely different views about the Palestinian issue, the Palestinian conflict. So this is not a question of civil war. This is precisely why I'm suggesting to you that this should not come from a government official and say, we are going to necessarily do A, B, C, and D now. I am talking about public forum, that is the media, the schools, begin to educate, different, provide different kind of information. You need to change mindset. The whole subject matter is, it's a mindset. We need to work on the mindset. I am not suggesting to you, you can achieve that overnight, but that's going to happen. Because, again, if you accept one basic principle, the inevitability of coexistence. I challenge anyone to show me how can you mitigate that. You've got to accept that as a matter of principle. Yes?
Thank you. I really appreciate your presentation, and I sympathize with what you're promoting or your ideas. But how much of the fact that we have these embedded images of one's narrative as a part of the very legitimacy of each other's statehood, right, makes it fundamentally so difficult if we take your perspective that really there's a psychological undercurrent, that there is no resolution to this problem. In other words, as long as Israelis view themselves as Israelis because of their victimhood both present and past, and similarly Palestinians view themselves, let's be frank, recent constructs, right? Palestinians view themselves as Palestinian only because of the other. That view, I'm afraid, and it's very much like many other kinds of cultural arguments that I find leads us to the view that this is intractable, never solvable. As soon as we start hearing the words, it's religious, psychological, cultural, we're moving, I think, the policy conversation away from what it should be, which is let's get out a pen on the map and start drawing some boundaries. And we start to get into a very, I think, complicated, fuzzy area, which doesn't say it doesn't exist. I'm just saying that it makes, I think, negotiations on what really is a land problem and not cultural, not psychological, and not religious, I think ever more, futile in the eyes of many who may propose that kind of narrative. Thank you.
What you're saying, on the surface will appear to be the case. But I want you to know that polls have been taken in Israel and among the Palestinians for the last 10, 15 years. Every single poll, every single year, have shown consistently that between 60 and 65 to 70% of both sides opt for support two-state solution on the basis of 1967 borders with some minor changes, that is with some land swap, between 1 to 7%. You have to look, so when we talk about Israelis, this is not just one single, if anything about Israel, when there was last election, you know how many parties were created? 24 ran for the election. So you can't talk about Israelis as if they were one single body, homogeneous. They think the same way, they work the same way. Look at the Palestinians. You're going to find the same thing. But the fact is this, that is, whereas they are within each community, they are very much divided ideologically, politically, and otherwise, there is that strong desire by the majority who wants to put an end to the conflict. And there is absolutely no doubt in my mind about it, having lived this for the last 20 years, day in and day out. What I'm suggesting then to you, what is going to take is the action, is the steps that we're going to have to begin now in earnest, and not wait for the politicians. Netanyahu does not represent the majority of the Israeli population. Doesn't. Not then, not now, not ever. He is not. And therefore, we have to find out how do we appeal to those Israelis who want to listen, and they are the majority. They are the majority. And the same thing can be said. When Mahmoud Abbas visited Gaza, after the United Nations General Assembly's acceptance, how was he greeted in Gaza? How many, estimated 500,000 people went to greet him? You would think this is unthinkable, that the president of the Palestinian Authority will be greeted so warmly in Gaza. People in Gaza want to have peace. It is the leadership. There is no leadership with vision. There is no leadership with courage. There is no leadership prepared to die for the cause. You've got to have that leader who will be prepared to die for the cause. Then you're going to see change. Yes, sir.
I was wondering, actually, you described the contact theory, that actually if Israelis and Palestinians knew each other, met with each other, that there will be somehow we could mitigate the conflict. Well, there has been some research and many projects, and it seems actually this contact theory is not sustainable. What do you suggest that we actually, what kind of approach shall we take in order to make the dialogue and fact, sustainable? And also, I was wondering how will the Palestinian statehood will actually affect Israel's approach to the conflict. For instance, if we think that Palestinian Authority could sue Israel to the International Criminal Justice Court.
But, you know, when we talk about interaction between the two sides, I just want to remind you what was the case before the year 2000. Thousands of Israelis were traveling to the West Bank. They bought tons of things, their food, name it, clothing, furniture, bought from the West Bank, brought back. You could not tell who is a Palestinian, who is an Israeli. And that, unfortunately, tragically stopped with the eruption of the Second Intifada. And I don't want to go into who was right, who was wrong. That isn't the issue. So what I'm saying to you, yes, there were now some efforts, some people living, connecting with one another, but the scale is necessary. I wanted to suggest that any government in Israel will speak honestly about two-state solution. Open the door, open the borders. Okay, have a checkpoint, make sure they don't carry weapons. Let 50, 100,000 Palestinians a week to go to Israel and let them see for themselves. Allow 50, 60, 70,000 Israelis to go to the West Bank and see for themselves. You need to create that kind of connection, not sporadically here and there some Palestinian Israelis meet. You have to do it on a landscape. That is, again, goes back to the principal point. Do you want peace or you don't want peace? And as long as you have leadership such as like Netanyahu and his cohorts, you're not going to make too many advances. And that is the problem we have.
I apologize to the people back there. There's some people who want to have coffee with you, and they have questions. Dr. Aman, if you join me up here. I think you always make us think, as you do your students and your chancellor. I found out, as I noted these gentlemen when they were undergraduates, had been elected to Phi Sigma Omega, the Honor Society of Public Policy people. I don't know why they weren't elected. Could it have been their grade average? I don't know. But I talked to the board, and as chancellor of Phi Sigma Omega, we decided that we present both of them with life membership. And I won't tell anybody that you didn't get it because you were valedictorians of your class. And you both exemplified the kind of conversation we hope will be heard today. And I'm trying to exemplify ending on schedule. And to all our chairs and panelists, if you will do that, we will move quite along here the way we always do. Long life membership.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Coffee and refreshments and that, and starting again.